Good afternoon. This is Adrian Warden in Management 615, Organizational Behavior. And I am doing my response to the case study on Holacracy and whether Derek should go forward and push for the initiative along with his friend Rogier, or if he should oppose it. After doing research on Holacracy and the pros and cons of that organizational structure, I came to the conclusion that Derek should promote and push for the Holacracy initiative with his longtime friend. Now, the reason I came to that assessment was because there are just more pros than cons that are based on the unique situation that the company context is in. Because of the business that they're in, it being construction and very project based, they won't fall into a lot of the same traps that maybe some other different companies may encounter if they try to do the same holistic approach. For instance, in talking about some of the cons, some of my research talked about a company that was called Medium. It was a social media company that they found it was difficult to coordinate efforts at scale. So when they had the bigger endeavors they were trying to do, they found it very difficult. And context won't fall into that same trap because they're such a project-based company, they will be able to alleviate any problems with that issue. So the three main problems of Holacracy would be employees struggling with fragmentation, complications in how the employees are compensated, and complications in how and what type of employees actually need to be hired. And because of the very unique situation that Context is in terms of it being so widespread, since it's a global company, being holistic would actually make it easier for the company to do business and alleviate those three issues. Because with the fragmentation, because the employees would be local, or most of their work would be done locally, and the hiring, the work, what they needed to do, the number of roles that they would have to play in the organization would not have to be as much. Now, you might get into more fragmentation at the higher level, but at least in the local level of the local projects, I think it would actually work a lot better. In terms of compensation, that also would be better because since they're global, obviously the skill sets in the compensation of each country and each currency is going to be very different. So it makes more sense to have that compensation chart or values be based on the region and not necessarily as a company-wide policy. And lastly, in hiring new employees, of course, it would make more sense to hire employees that come from the region where you're doing your project versus them hiring from abroad or all over the place, and the new people not necessarily being as accustomed to the whatever normal order of business that happens in that specific region where they're doing the project. Now, on to the different pros of doing Holacracy and why I actually ended up deciding that this was the correct approach is that in general, when you talk about the changing market that we live in now, you want, especially as big of a company as Context was, it made it more nimble and able to withstand the different fluctuations of the market by changing from the holistic approach. Because sometimes if you have too much of a top-down hierarchical system, the company can't really make moves fast enough. You also need to be able to have a nice, stable work environment and access to critical resources. And those same things would be very easily accessible in a holistic company scale, because you, whatever resources you need, you can go out and find those. You have the ability to go out and find those without having to wait for someone from up top to approve of the changes that you deem necessary to complete whatever project you're doing. And finally, you get away from having the thing of too much standardization, because although they talk about in the article of how standardization could have been bad in that specific instance in Russia, they also don't mention of how, because they're making products in so many different regions, the controls, the amount of money spent, whatever permits or anything that are needed are going to be very region specific. And by being holistic, each project, depending on where they are in the country or in the world, would be able to create a final product that met the specifications of the country that they needed. And at the same time, they could, because they were holistic, they could also have a higher level, if some of those products were going to be shipped overseas or outside of that region, they could also have a department that was over the international products that led them to have higher controls if necessary to alleviate any problems of standards or quality issues. So based on those reasons, although like I said, there are pros and cons to the holacracy, I feel that there's more pros than cons in the specific case of context. So I would encourage Derek to approve the initiative. Thank you.